sometimes there is some risk with trying to do like some of these like more intensive weight loss diets or weight loss strategies. With Ozempic, your appetite really goes down. As a dietitian, I'm focused on making sure that people are still meeting their nutritional needs, right? Because if they're not, you do get a risk of some of those things that would impact your quality of life, right? You do, like if you are, in that area of malnutrition because you're not feeding yourself and you just keep on increasing your dose, you do have a risk. Ozempic, but also just weight loss diets in general, it can increase your risk of sarcopenia, so that muscle loss, so that your quality of life isn't as great because you can't do much with your body now that you've lost that weight.
Good morning, Adrian.
Good morning, Trevor. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. And how are you?
Doing great. Looking forward to our conversation here with Michelle.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it gets talked about so much. I really am interested in food and health in that manner. I really find that it's such an interesting piece that we talk about, and there's so many different diets or the Ozempics and the get slim quick kind of fads out there. So I'm really interested to hear what Michelle has to say about all these different topics today.
That's right. Michelle Broughton is a registered dietitian. We're having a conversation with her today. I think Michelle brings a lot of unique experience and expertise to the idea of diet. And so there's lots for us to talk about there beyond just what you should and shouldn't do, which in a lot of cases, I think we kind of know what we should and shouldn't do, but that doesn't make it easy to do the right things.
Exactly. Welcome, Michelle. I'm so happy to have you on here today. Really looking forward to just learning a little bit more about what goes on in the food world. I just find that it's so confusing. Where it's just like every week it just seems like
it really can be.
Yeah, I feel like there's just every week there's a new fad diet, or there's this food is great and that food's great this week. It seems like it's constantly changing, and I can never keep up with it. Try to do the right thing, but it's just so difficult. So hopefully you can shed a bit of light on what that is, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. And, without further ado, just give me a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do. I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, for sure. So, as you've mentioned, so my name is Michelle. I'm a registered dietitian in Ontario. And personally, I am a toddler mom. I have a big dog baby. She's a big scaredy cat. She's a mastiff, so she's huge, but she doesn't realize. I love all things outside, traveling, hiking and stuff. In terms of professionally speaking, I'm very into like a whole bunch of areas in nutrition, but one of them is, healthy aging, malnutrition, stuff like that. So I'm actually also an assistant professor at Northern Ontario School of Medicine. And so I have presented to med students about malnutrition, age-related muscle loss, which I feel like isn't on a lot of people's radar, but it's one of those areas that I just want to be that, that PSA, the public service announcement about some of that stuff. In terms of, myself as a registered dietitian, I see clients one-on-one as well. And I do that virtually just to make it easier access for people. And I'll do all types of different topics. For example, one of my areas of specialty is diabetes. I really believe in the use of AI and technology to make our lives easier. That being said, I know I struggled with technology this morning, but that's not normal for me. And we can talk about that later if you want. But and then another area is I'm a member of the International Association of Eating Disorder Professionals, and I do have a background in psychology as well. So I really love helping people, when they know what they should be eating, but they have a hard time actually getting there, whether it's from the emotional eating, the cravings that come up, disordered eating. I feel like that's an area that I thrive on. Just kind of dealing with that behind the scenes versus just like what you should be eating. Does that answer your question a little bit?
A lot bit. Yeah, no, that's amazing.
Okay.
Absolutely, absolutely amazing. Yeah. So, when I started looking at this, people I feel are starting to take a little more seriously in what they're putting in their bodies. But I still don't think we really fully understand what we should be eating, how much, is there a right time to eat, like all those sorts of things. So like, can you shed a little bit of light on that for us?
Yeah, for sure. So I will say it doesn't have to be too complicated. Like you mentioned, there's a lot of different diets out there, a lot of different information, and it gets really complicated. But I mean, I'm going to sound like the boring dietitian when I say this. There is a such thing as Canada's food guide, and it has the basics of like what to pay attention to. So for example, making sure that you have, fruit or vegetables at all your meals, like ideally half of what you're eating, about a quarter of what you're eating being protein at your meals, and then the other quarter being your whole grains. That's a great place to start. And then depending on your interests or your health concerns, like I'll layer onto that.
Okay. So, it's funny you say like proteins and some of these different things. So my aunt has something called PKU. I'm not sure if you're familiar
Okay.
with this, but it's essentially an allergy to protein. And
Mhm.
when she was born 50 some years ago, they basically thought that you just don't give the baby protein for 3 months or 6 months or whatever that timeline was, and then you could reintroduce it. They found out that afterwards that they should never have protein. So they're all on special diets now. My aunt is now mentally handicapped because they put her back on protein. People that have PKU now just live basically normal lives without protein. We take her out for dinner and we just say she can't have any protein. And they go, well, can she have chicken? And so like people just really don't understand what a lot of these things are, and it's or cheese or like all these different things. And it's really frustrating, but it's also something that I just don't think people really understand what a protein is and why you should have it, or some of these different things. So like, can you just shed a little bit of light on what these different pieces are, and let's go right back to
Yeah.
basics, because I really think that this is a lot more confusing than what we actually give it credit for.
No, I think that's a great idea. And I will just say, for the listeners, PKU is, it's serious. It's very serious. It's also very rare. So if you're kind of wondering like, oh, like should I be avoiding protein? If you haven't been diagnosed with PKU, you're fine. But protein, it's we get our energy from a few different types of fuel. So one of them is carbs. I think a lot of people know about carbs. One of them's fat, and then the other one is protein. And so protein comes from animal sources. Those are your biggest sources of protein. So like your chicken, your turkey, your beef, and also some of your animal products. So your eggs, your dairy, those are sources of protein. And then you can also do the plant-based proteins as well. So those would be things like you do get a little bit of protein from your grains. You do get a little bit of protein from like, you do get protein from your beans, your legumes, your nuts and seeds, your tofu as well. Those are some of your bigger sources of protein. And they're helpful for so many different reasons, honestly. It's a big building block for our bodies. So they help, maintain our immune system. They help, maintain our bone mass, our muscle mass. It also helps keep you full for a little bit longer, right? So if you had like just a meal with like straight up only carbs, for example, you might feel pretty hungry, within an hour or two after, versus if you added a little bit of protein, it helps kind of keep your energy levels a little bit more stable for a little bit longer. And it has that satiety factor as well.
Now, when we were talking in our kind of pre-conversation, you were talking a lot about, as people get closer to what you might call seniors, like just generally as they age, there's this focus, I think, in society around losing weight, you were talking about how that can actually be detrimental at certain ages, and how maybe a focus on BMI as opposed to the absolute number that's on the scale becomes more important. And I think protein fits into this, although you're the expert. Can you elaborate on where you were going with that?
Yeah, that was an interesting conversation that we had. I think you're right. Like, a lot of people like, okay, well, I want to start paying attention to my health. I need to lose weight. Well, it's not always the like needed or a great idea, especially like as you're kind of getting into those, like you said, the 65 plus age range. And the reason is, as a dietitian, what's on my radar is I want to make sure that, you're maintaining your muscle mass, because a lot of times if you are, especially if you're doing like a really strict diet, you're trying to lose a lot of weight, you're trying to restrict entire food groups or really have like a low calorie diet. Sometimes you will often lose more muscle mass with that, and then that sets you up for failure later on, because it sets you up to be a little bit more of a fall risk of fractures, risk of a whole bunch of things, to be honest. And yeah, so I really see the value of protein to make sure that you are giving your body those building blocks that you need. And in terms of the number on the scale anyway, what we've seen, so BMI, it's not, so for those of you who don't know, it's basically just a math calculation of your weight and your height, right? But it doesn't take into consideration like your bone mass, your muscle mass, your fluids, like your fat mass either. So it's not something that we want to focus on of like, oh, I need to be this certain BMI. However, what we were talking about was how actually when you are a senior, when you get to that 65 plus age range too, what we've seen is that in terms of your risk, you have a lower risk of mortality and other health complications and problems when you're actually sitting at a bit of a higher BMI than what you would expect. So, there's like the normal BMI, there's the overweight, there's obese. And what we see is that for seniors, the overweight category of BMI is actually like the lowest risk. So it's okay to have, some extra cushion.
That's definitely interesting, and I've always struggled with BMI. Growing up as a hockey player, I was actually like pretty fit at one point in time, and in my playing days, I actually registered in that like overweight to almost obese kind of weight, and I was never like a big bulky, but I was like an athlete at one point in time, long time ago. And so I've always struggled with BMI as a measurement, because I like what you just said. I never really took into account, the muscle or some of these other things as far as I was concerned. But it's interesting that, that is kind of where you want to be as you age. Definitely interesting.
Yeah. And I have a question for the two of you. When in life do you think that you start losing muscle mass just because of your age?
Yeah, I was going to say around now. I don't start to feel like as soon as I have kids and I can't pay attention to my workouts the same amount. I don't know. I'm going to say 40.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what I would have guessed as well. I feel that. So I turned 40 a couple years ago. Adrian, very recently. And I feel that since around that point in time, it's been tougher to put on muscle. So I would think it's somewhere around that early to mid 40s, let's say.
Okay. Yeah. And actually, after the age of 30, your muscle mass starts decreasing like 3 to 8% per decade. So it's a little bit of a slower start of the muscle mass loss. And then after 50, it's 1 to 2% per year. So it is definitely something to pay attention to, right? Like we want to be strong to, even just keep doing our daily life activities and for retirement, being able to do those, the things that we're passionate about. So for me, it's the walking, the hiking.
So
and
is
stuff.
that an argument for including more strength training into like, normal life for, anybody over their 30s, which is just, most of the population?
Yeah, I'm going to throw a term out. So there's sarcopenia, which is age-related muscle loss, just because of stuff that's going on in our bodies related to the physiology. And the number one thing that's important with that is including that, the exercise component with that. So making sure that you've got some strength training. The number two thing is to make sure that you're getting enough protein. So they actually work hand in hand. So the protein is super important, but it does work along with the exercise. And so a lot of people that I speak with, well, some people do get enough protein, but for a lot of people, they're not quite getting to those targets. And one area that I find a lot is most of our breakfasts in Canada, they're kind of lower in protein. A lot of people will just have cereal, or, maybe we skip breakfast. Yeah. And it's an area of improvement for a lot of people, because for our protein needs, we actually do need to have it spread out throughout the day. So that's, if someone's trying to do the intermittent fasting to try to, take care of their health, that's one area that is sometimes a struggle, is to make sure that you're getting the protein multiple times throughout your day.
Yeah, so those are a couple things that I had actually had on there. Was that intermittent fasting? That's become such a fad the last couple of years. I don't think I heard about it until a couple of years ago. I know, Adrian, I've got on this,
dabbled
from time to time. So is this something we should be looking at? Is starving yourself for portions of the day good for us, or is it something that just forget about it? Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and just eat when you're hungry.
So, okay, I'm going to provide the dietitian answer, and then I'll just also say it is definitely individualized, because what works for one person might not work for the other. So in terms of as a dietitian, I review the evidence, right? Or keep an eye on the evidence, and it's still mixed. There are some benefits that people are seeing for fasting. And certainly for some people, it seems easier to just say, nope, it's after 8 p.m. I can't have anything else, right? But it's looking like you actually do tend to lose more muscle mass with the fasting. Like I said, it's still mixed, but that's kind of what we're seeing. And if you are doing the fasting, there's also evidence that earlier on in the day is more helpful, because it's with your circadian rhythm. And so I know a lot of people are not interested in doing fasting from starting at 8, right? Usually it's people want to start at noon to 8 or noon to 6, right? So that they have their favorite meals. But
yeah.
But yeah. And
I want to do
really,
it, but I don't want to be overly inconvenienced.
Right? Yeah. And I still want to have supper, right? I want to have supper with my family. I want to do those important things with food, because food is so much more than just, the building blocks for our bodies, right? It's connection and everything else.
Yeah.
When I've done it, when I've done some intermittent fasting from time to time, I've found I find it hard, because I want to have a breakfast some days. And mostly I'm trying to listen to my body. I keep telling my kids that. I have young kids, and it's, listen to your body. It'll tell you when you are full. You don't have to finish everything on your plate. You need to eat enough to feel, your body will tell you when you're done, kind of thing. And so I'm trying to listen. I'm trying to do that for myself too, right? And some days I won't eat breakfast. And it's mostly because I'm standing there in front of the fridge going, I don't want any of this. My body is telling me I don't want it. But what I did find is that when I'm doing the intermittent fasting, nothing good happens after 7:30 at night, right? It's the bag of chips. It's the couple of beers while I watch the game. It's that stuff. So, I could intermittent fast from 7:30 to 11 o'clock and probably get the same improvement as if I carried that through till noon the next day.
Yeah. And so with my like background in, the emotional eating and all that kind of stuff, that's like the area that I love is like for some people, yeah, it's like I said, it's easy to have to that rule. Like I'm just not going to do it. For other people, it doesn't work because it's a hard rule. And then, some people have that like kind of rebel personality. Like as soon as I feel like I can't have it, I want it, right? Because I'm telling myself I can't eat after 7. Now it's all I'm thinking about. And so I really like to dive in and talk about like the reasons for eating. Is it a habit? Is it stress? Is it, fatigue, tiredness, and kind of dive into those reasons so that we can kind of solve those problems for the long haul versus just having that rule of like, I shouldn't do this after a certain time. But yeah, you bring up an interesting point about breakfast, and sometimes we just need a little bit of to refresh our breakfast. And so with paying attention to protein, and like I said, a lot of people don't get enough at breakfast, 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal is helpful. If you're having like meat at your meals where you're having like even just like the size of a deck of cards of chicken, like you're good at that meal. But what we see is that we do need to spread it out throughout the day. So ideally at least 3 times in a day. And with breakfast, a lot of times we're not getting anywhere close to that 20 grams. So let's just talk about an example. Do any of you want to share what you had to have, what you had for breakfast?
Trevor should go
today?
First.
Adrian had Fruit Loops and chocolate milk.
No, worse. I had leftover
Fruit Loops
pizza.
And
it's the worst.
Sour Patch Kids.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I'm pretty consistent with my breakfasts. We got into so it's funny. I've got a 7-year-old, and I started eating like a 7-year-old for a while. He loves his pita round, so I was having that with like peanut butter and jam, and then all of a sudden, and then more carbs at dinner as well because he loves pasta like most kids do. So I tried to curb that a little bit a few years ago, and we started getting into smoothies. Pretty good mix of stuff in there. We got some yogurt, some spinach. We do chia seeds and flax seeds and a mix with that. We add some protein powder, some almond milk, and then some frozen fruit. So that's kind of our normal breakfast typically.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a great option. And so like if someone else is doing that, just to kind of tweak the protein, right? So if you're doing regular yogurt versus Greek yogurt or Icelandic yogurt, the Icelandic is going to have more protein per the same amount.
So that is what we use.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. And the protein powder is a great option.
My wife loves the fatty yogurt. She's like 9% is her favorite. I'm like, I can't do it. But yeah, so we're kind of in that, Greek yogurt, Icelandic yogurt typically.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. And yeah, and I know, like I said, a lot of people will do like the cereal for breakfast. What are your favorite cereals?
Well,
or what cereal do you think might have a good amount of protein?
That's a different question. I usually have Vector. That's what's in the cupboard right now. I try to have something that's like a quasi-adult cereal, but I mean, I can't do Shreddies. I just can't do it. So like there's something practical as much as I can. I'm curious what you think, like what has the most protein though?
Yeah. So the Vector, it says high protein on it, doesn't it? Yeah. So it's about if you do about 1 cup, it's only about 5 grams of protein. So if you're trying to get to like 20 to 30 grams so that you can, preserve that muscle mass and set yourself up for the day, you're not quite getting there. Now with the milk, about a cup of milk is 9 grams of protein. So it does add up, but just something to keep in mind. It's actually not one of the higher protein cereals that you can get out there.
What is?
Like Special K is better. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Or switching it up. Like, have you ever done overnight oats?
No.
My wife absolutely loves those. I'm not a huge fan of them, but both my wife and kids will do that from time to time. I think we've got a few of those in in the house there right now.
Yeah. Yeah, overnight oats is an option. Even just like if you're doing like toast, you know, eggs on top of your toast has more protein than just the peanut butter. Peanut butter is about 3 grams of protein per tablespoon. So, you know, depending on how much you're having, you're not quite getting there. So adding some eggs is a great idea. Smoothies, definitely fun, definitely great to have, you know, to include protein with that. Regular like cow's milk or even soy milk has more protein than almond milk. As much as like almonds themselves have protein in them, almond milk has like none, unfortunately.
There's a lot of talk about protein here. Is that really what you feel most people are lacking? Because I think of, again, we kind of go back to what protein is, and I feel like most people have like a giant portion of meat typically, outside of the breakfast, which definitely sounds like it's lacking in protein almost across the board. To me, I would have thought it was like less of that, because the meat component is usually so much. But is that what you're seeing is more people just aren't getting protein?
I'm seeing that especially at breakfast. And like I said, so we need to have it spread out throughout the day. So even if like you meet your daily needs of protein, but in one meal, like you're not going to have that benefit. So I do see that for the breakfast, it's a challenge area. And in terms of like the benefits that I'm talking about, it's, it affects your muscle protein synthesis. So, that protein being used to actually maintain or build up your muscle, it needs to be throughout the day. And then another area I see that is a challenge for people is, like I was mentioning with the weight loss side of things. People are trying to lose weight, and it's great to try to be healthier, but it's helpful to remember that the behaviors that you're doing, those are helpful even if that number on the scale doesn't change, right? So sometimes, if it doesn't change, we get frustrated, and then we kind of give up. Or if, our weight does what we want it to do, sometimes we just kind of like, well, I don't need to follow this way of eating anymore, right? But there are so many health benefits for the behaviors, and weight is an outcome. It's not something that we can overtly control.
I feel like so much of what we eat is, I won't eat that piece of pizza or that pizza for breakfast like Adrian, because it's a vanity thing. I want to look in the mirror and feel attractive. I want to I want to feel fit, and it's not necessarily because of the health reasons for most people, I think. And especially as you're getting older and you're getting that little bit of extra weight, you want to lose the weight so that you still look younger and healthier, not necessarily because you're going to be healthier going forward. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. And yeah, sometimes it's not about the health, right? It's just wanting to look a certain way, and sometimes it's that relationship with food piece that is helpful to think about. And what are the reasons for eating? Are you eating because you're actually hungry when you see the pizza, or is it just are you eating because you've got a craving now that you've seen it, right? And
availability. That, right? If it's there, I'll eat it. I had to stop playing men's league hockey because I realized that it was a total disaster for me health-wise. I was going out and playing hockey, and you'd think it'd be good for you, but between a couple of beers and some pizza and wings afterwards, like I was not in a calorie deficit by going and playing hockey. I was eating more food, worse food, at a worse time, because the games were always 10:30, 11 o'clock on a Friday night. So I'm messing up my sleep. I'm messing up my diet. Not that I'm careful, but this is obviously not improving it. And I had to opt out of men's league hockey because I wasn't doing a good enough job of self-control. It was easier to just not go. And honestly, I think it was probably a good move. Now you were heading down an interesting path here around just the motivations and what makes people make these decisions, and whether it's more psychology or more like the vanity versus the psychology of whether we want to be healthier. That was kind of where Trevor was going there, I think. And I think it foots a little bit maybe to this conversation about these miracle drugs like Ozempic. And like, I find this so interesting because it's obviously not improving the quality of anything anybody's putting in their body, but it is having the benefit of losing weight. And from a vanity point of view, maybe that's really relevant. And then from a health point of view, maybe it's not. And I'm just really curious what, you as a professional feel about this kind of trend, if it's even a net positive.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great question. So I do work a lot in diabetes, right? And I have seen the benefit in terms of health. It is a weight loss, or it is being used for weight loss as well. And, it is working for people. It does come with its fair share of side effects, and it's important. I think vanity is one thing, health is one thing, but quality of life too is another thing, right? So for some people, like, if it's just causing like the nausea, the runs, is it really worth it, right? Because I think ideally we all want
some people would say yes.
Yeah, for sure.
To drop a couple belt sizes, yeah.
We do want to live our life in a way that feels best for us, right? All I'm saying is that there are some side effects there, and it is one of those things that you'd pretty much have to take it for life, right? If you stop taking it, it's, your hunger hormones are going to go back to the way that they were before, so it's definitely worth thinking it over before trying to start it. But I will say one thing that in terms of, I know, for some people it's not about the health benefits. Sometimes there is some risk with trying to do like some of these like more intensive weight loss diets or weight loss strategies. With Ozempic, your appetite really goes down. As a dietitian, I'm focused on making sure that people are still meeting their nutritional needs, right? Because if they're not, you do get a risk of some of those things that would impact your quality of life, right? You do, like if you are, in that area of malnutrition because you're not feeding yourself and you just keep on increasing your dose, you do have a risk. Ozempic, but also just weight loss diets in general. It can increase your risk of sarcopenia, so that muscle loss, so that, your quality of life isn't as great because you can't do much with your body now that you've lost that weight and you've lost that muscle with it. Weight cycling. So, losing some weight and then it coming back and then losing it again, coming back. We're seeing that really affects your stress hormones, and it does negatively impact your weight compared to someone who just stayed at that original weight. Bone loss, increased risk of falls and fractures, increased time to heal. And then, loss of the muscle, but the bone mass as well. So just all things to really keep in mind. And I'm just kind of, as I'm talking, I'm like, okay, if I'm listening to this, I'm like, okay, you're telling me all these things that I shouldn't be doing. Told me to add some protein. What should I be focusing on if I want to try to be healthier? And I think it's just, try to make some small changes, depending on what your goals are, right? So if you do want to pay attention to the size of your body, it is worthwhile to, try to figure out when you're eating. Am I just eating just because it's out of habit, right? Even though my needs are kind of going down a little bit year by year, because that's what happens, and I'm just eating the same amount. Now I'm just eating more than I need. Maybe I need to start paying attention to that and eating more, like you said, trying to listen to your body.
And is that just like smaller portions to begin with, and then, give it that 5 minutes before you go back for seconds, and like is that sort of stuff? Like
that and like I said with Canada's food guide idea, right? Like filling half your plate with those like nutrient dense foods, like your produce, right? It's a lot of fiber, a lot of water that you're having, and it's going to make you feel fuller with less calories too.
So Michelle, honestly, I could talk to you all day long here, and I've got like probably 30 things that we're not going to have time to cover today because this could be like a 4 hour conversation, I think. But I think there's two things I would love to just cover before we let you get on with the rest of your day here. And the first is, I think we talked about it a little bit, but how does eating change as you get older? And should we be doing stuff differently, or is it just follow those guidelines that you've talked about a little bit here, or is it adding or subtracting different things?
Yeah, so eating changes when we get older. Our needs for calories go down, but we still have those high and even higher actually needs for some of those nutrients that come in the food that we're eating. So we need to really make every bite count to make sure that we're getting enough of the vitamins, the minerals, the protein as well. That's one thing to pay attention to. In terms of, we didn't really talk about women's health. You're two men, but one thing that is important for a lot of women who age is all those changes that happen with the perimenopause and the menopause. And there are some nutrients that can be helpful to make that transition a little bit less challenging, I'm going to say. We won't focus on it too much. I'll say phytoestrogens are one thing that is super helpful, trying to get your flax and trying to get the fiber that you need, because your hormones are going to change your gut health, and that's going to lead to some challenges. But if anyone's interested in learning more about that, just reach out. I'm not going to bore the two of you about menopause, but it is an important area.
I'm sure our listeners will that is so important, and it is really interesting. For listeners less than us, but also we do have wives that aren't probably quite there yet. But that is interesting when as family dynamics, what you need for a man and for a woman is different, and typically you're eating together. So putting that together in a meal plan could probably be interesting.
That's true, because the needs are a little bit different, but you are eating as a family, and it is helpful to, and actually even for men, some of the changes, or the things that I would recommend for women going through menopause, it can be a 10-year phase, right? So it's long, but some of these things, they're helpful. They're not harmful for men as well, right? There's a lot of benefits to having a high fiber diet, just as one example, for men and women, right?
The other one was more about the food prices. They've gotten pretty insane this past year or two, and what I really want to know is, how do I eat right but also pay for my mortgage?
That is a fair question, and I am almost interested in turning the tables on the two of you finance guys. But no, it can be helpful to spend a little bit more time planning the grocery store trips, right? Buying in bulk can be helpful. Buying in season can be helpful for your produce. In terms of protein, once again, you're like, I don't want to hear talk about protein anymore. But there are some, more cost-effective ways to get the protein in, right? So your plant-based proteins tend to be cheaper. Tofu, for example, is pretty cheap, and it's a pretty high amount of protein. And so for a lot of people, you might hear protein and be like, no, thank you. That's not what I'm interested in. But you can add it to a whole bunch of things to just boost that nutritional content. Because there's some fiber in there as well. It's not just protein, but adding it to smoothies instead of your yogurt base. It takes on the flavor of whatever you're using with it. Thickening your creamy soups, or adding it to your pasta sauce. I've done that and it tastes great. Those are some ways to just make a couple of tweaks just to use some of those less expensive foods. What about planning? Do you feel like planning how often you go to restaurants or planning your grocery list in advance? Do you feel like those things have been helpful for your families?
Yeah, I mean, we eat out probably more than we should, and I always find that it's when you're eating out more often, I typically go for more like what Adrian had for breakfast there. I'm gonna keep bringing that up, buddy. You knew this was you knew this was coming. You knew we were talking to a dietitian today, and still you went for the pizza. So I'm not gonna let that slide. But that's more the food I'll get at the restaurants. I love like a spicy chicken sandwich with like just crispy and like the actual like just the worst kind of chicken you could ever have, and and then add some fries and have a beer, or it's like 8 gajillion calories and nothing good has gone into my body. So eating out more often, that becomes less of a special treat and more of a norm, which is not great. But my wife does most of the grocery shopping, and she's pretty darn diligent with what she does on that side. So, I'm a little bit out of the loop on that, but I just know we have lots of fruit and vegetables most days. So we're pretty good there.
Yeah, I like what you said about like, you're having it more often, and so it's less like a treat now. And so, yeah, like turning that back into a treat so that you don't maybe feel as guilty when you do have like the beer and the fries and everything. And I know there's some foods that you buy or that you get while you're out that do better as leftovers as well, right? So, I mean, fries, you can't always take them home. They don't taste that great the next day. But like if you had like, I don't know, I love pasta as well.
Yeah.
If you had like a pasta with a side salad, right? Having most of your salad, and asking for a box for your pasta before you start eating it so that you can portion out what you think you should be saving for later, and then having that as a second meal. That's one way to save a little bit of money, right?
Control portion as well. Like that's
that too.
That's my problem. Probably one of my problems. I have many, but definitely, the propensity to go back for round two when I just don't need it. Getting used to the plate is a certain size, put the food on it that is appropriate in the first place. Don't go back for a second. I think makes a really big difference for me. Do you have anything you'd like to add before we wrap things up, Michelle? Like, this has been fantastic, but any final thoughts?
It's funny. It seems like, oh, this is such a hard question. Why, shouldn't I have thought about something that I wanted to say as a wrap up? But I'm just, I think that it's important to remember to go easy on ourselves, right? Like, or be gentle with ourselves, right? Sometimes like life gets in the way, especially if you're like in the, like Adrian, you said that a lot of people that you have as clients are kind of in the last areas, like the last stage of their career. It might be a busy career, and then it does take a lot of time and effort if we're going to try to work on our nutrition or try to feel healthier. And giving ourselves a little bit of grace when we're trying to get started. Don't feel discouraged and be like, oh, there's no point, right? It's even just doing like 1 or 2 new things each week. Like buying a bag of apples and trying to put one at work every day and try to eat it there, right? It's those small things. They really do add up to big change. And the other thing I'll say is sometimes it's helpful to have that support, right? We don't have to do things alone. And sometimes even just talking through things with a dietitian, it can help you prioritize what would be the best bang for your buck in terms of like the changes to make. And like, what should you focus on right now? How should you get started in a way that's not too overwhelming, but also impacting your health or, fitness goals, I'll say.
Perfect. Michelle, that's awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing some thoughts with us. I love that your practice is virtual. So wherever folks are, they can reach you. I think that's really important these days. It makes it easy to be in touch on a regular basis, which is, I would assume, very important in the work that you do. I can even imagine touching base, from vacation and going like, okay, here's what I'm faced with at this resort. like, how am I going to do this in a way that still, makes it feel like a vacation, but doesn't make me feel like I've made a bunch of mistakes when I get home from my vacation, and like just that kind of conversation.
Yeah, I'd feel terrible after.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the nice thing about the virtual is like, you don't have to worry about driving somewhere like, half an hour to an hour out of your day just to drive somewhere for an appointment and then drive back. Like, lots of benefits for the virtual. And yeah, so my company is called Northern Nutrition Dietitian. We have a website, easy booking system, so you can just kind of go there and book yourself if you're interested. Yeah, I love chatting with clients about, I love problem solving and, talking more about different areas of concern. Certainly we talked about a couple areas today, but even just like cholesterol problems, there's a lot of things that we can do to improve that, or blood pressure problems, all these things that come up. When you start to get into the near retirement age and you're like, what is this new problem? I can help you with
We'll
that.
put all the links for all of that into the show notes, so that if anybody is looking for an easy way to find Michelle, we will make it as easy as we possibly can, and definitely encourage you to have a chat with her if any of this has resonated. Michelle, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you both. It was really interesting chatting with you today, and I almost want to turn the tables and be like, let me quiz you on finance stuff now. I have some stuff to learn about your field.
We'll have to have you back on in the future, and maybe we'll do things pointed in the other direction.
Thanks.
Well, Adrian, that was quite the enlightening conversation we had with Michelle just now. That was a lot about protein. I wasn't necessarily expecting it to go in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I think, honestly, that's partly because I'm a guy and I like my protein sources. And I think there's some stereotypes there that are probably relatively true. But definitely for, our clientele and, that age group where retirement's starting to be a focus, or maybe you're already in retirement, I think it's really easy to fall off the bandwagon in the way that you eat or what you're focused on. And so just bringing the conversation back around to protein was unexpected, but makes a lot of sense to me now that I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, really, the only time I think about protein is I put a little of that protein powder in my morning smoothie, and then when I was actually playing hockey and more of that quote unquote athlete 20 a long time ago. I thought about protein a little bit more there, because as you're building muscles and that side of it. But, aside from that, it hasn't come into my daily, food intake, and then how much protein am I getting? Because like you said, I feel like I'm doing a decent job. But, when we take a look at even my breakfast, with even just that protein powder, I think my morning breakfast is about 10 grams of protein, where she's saying you need to be, 20 plus. At that meal. So yeah, it's really, really, really interesting, really enlightening. Definitely Let's
not talk about my leftover pizza breakfast then. But absolutely, I think it's an interesting focus. And I think Michelle has a lot more to offer too. Like, some of her specialties in working with people with diabetes and some of the technology she uses. She only touched on it very briefly in the conversation, but I think there's a lot to unpack there for the person who either has those concerns or is worried they might at some point have those concerns. And the psychology of food as well, and the way we kind of think about it and the struggles we deal with. The idea that you could develop what would be classified as an eating disorder in retirement. Like, I think of that as a young person's problem, but that's not necessarily true at all. And so I think there's a lot of value for the right kind of person to have a conversation with Michelle. I think she's great.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to talk to her again as well.
Yes, I think there's more we can unpack for sure.